Greetings and salutations, nerds. This is Praying for Superpowers.
Show about the deeper meanings, messages, and intricacies hidden within nerd culture. I'm Peter Jordahl.
And I'm Trevor Sharon, and today we're talking about the most isolated character in this isolating time, Stephen Leeds.
So if you don't know who Stephen Leeds is, go check out our Legion video. We'll put a link in the description. Go ahead and watch that. We've got a couple fan theories in there, but there's some time markers down in the comments. So skip to where you need to be. And basically, we're going to talk about a genius man who is always surrounded and always alone.
Yeah, Stephen Leeds is this interesting character because he's got... And just beware, like, there's going to be a lot of spoilers that happen throughout this conversation. So if you haven't read all three Legion books, do yourself a favor.
I mean, all three books are 352 pages. So
shortest Sanderson series you will ever read.
Easily.
The interesting thing about Stephen Leeds is that he seems very social because he's got all of these hallucinations that keep him company. But in reality, there's only one or two people that exist in reality in proximity to him.
Yeah. There's really only one person he interacts with regularly.
In a meaningful way. Yeah,
which is his butler. And then he occasionally, talks to, the morgue, people who work at the morgue and the people who work in the police department. And he used to be employed at the CIA, but he's not anymore. So it's just him and 42 parts of his psychosis.
Well, and so Pete, I was thinking about this last night as I was preparing for the episode. So remember at the end of the third book, and it's been like a long time since I've read them, so I'm already forgetting all the names. But at the end of the third book, the female friend is in the beginnings of Snapshot. Totally isolated. Whereas
his not his wife, but his partner and his doctor as well.
Yep. Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting because especially as we record this in the midst of quarantine and isolation, we wanted to do a Sanderson video and figured we'd do it around quarantine and the times that we're in. And it was interesting to see the juxtaposition between her in those moments with Snapshot, or what would become Snapshot in our theory, and Stephen Leeds, because somehow, even though Stephen Leeds seems so isolated, he's out in the world engaging with people and chooses not to live in this sort of blissful isolation. He chooses to engage in something that's really difficult for him.
Yeah. I think the big thing that really has an effect in this scenario is that she is choosing freedom from the pressures of existence, basically. So she is choosing to live an easy, simple life in the Snapshot universe, basically kind of like the Matrix, voluntary Matrix, whereas Stephen Leeds is choosing to live in the real world. And yet they're both isolating in different ways. He lives at home, he in a mansion all alone, just him and his butler and the parts of his psychosis. And she has chosen to get rid of the parts of her psychosis and live in a fake world where she's healthy.
Yeah. And I think, I do a lot of work with counseling, and I've been creating some videos for the counseling center that I'm a part of based on quarantine and what we're experiencing right now. And it's interesting because I've basically been telling people that we have those same choices. If we can either isolate in the midst of social distancing, which should be different, or we can engage in a meaningful way and try to grow and take advantage of this time and see the opportunities. And I think we can see a difference even between those two characters in the Legion books.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about this time of crisis, what you've said to me a couple times, is that we have an epidemic in the midst of a pandemic. So we have
Yeah.
this medical outbreak where we need testing and we need antibodies and vaccines. And it's something that the doctors are having to work on and fight in a medical scenario. And then this pandemic or this epidemic is mental health. People are forced into unsafe homes, forced to be alone when getting out is kind of one of their safety nets.
Yeah.
And on all these different things. Trevor, why don't you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the midst of all of this, what's really struck me is the panic that we've seen, the increase in anxious distress. It just seems like everybody's emotions really came out when the pandemic started. And my suspicion is that we're going to experience a lot more mental health recognition as the further we go along and even into recovery from this. One of the things that is unfortunate, very unfortunate, is that there will probably be an increase in suicides because so many of our social supports have been cut off. A lot of us just naturally do not do well in isolation or just staying at home all the time. In fact, like consulting with a lot of other counselors, one of the most common things that we will recommend to a client struggling with, say, depression, is to get out of their house and go engage with people. Well, now only half of that is really accessible, and even that feels different than it did before.
Yeah, there's nothing that's quite as exhausting as trying to set up a Zoom call or phone call with someone and they get distracted or the internet's not working or 100 different things go wrong and you've put all this energy and you haven't even left your house. And so the amount of energy you've put out versus how much you've actually gotten out of it is so little. And, you know, as someone who's struggled with PTSD and anxiety and depression that comes with that, I got to say that to me is very real. And I feel like I don't have very severe anxiety or depression. And so people that do, you know, I can only imagine how difficult that is. And that's why we wanted to talk about Stephen Leeds and his character of how he adapts to the world he's in by basically talking to himself.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you know, as we're talking about, like, it's difficult to get outside, it's difficult to engage because it doesn't feel normal. Like, those are all things that I feel Stephen Leeds says in the book, of like, he doesn't go out because it spends so much energy to be out in the world to engage with other people, and if he's at home, it's just so much less energy and he gets so much more out of it. I'm thinking about the white box too, the room that he goes into with all of his aspects, because there's no stimulus. Like, it's just a white box, and so he can really have space to exist without expending a ton of energy on the environment and things that his aspects can engage with. Maybe we need a white box. Maybe that's what comes out of this episode. Find yourself a white box.
I think a space, like creating a space for you to be creative, is, I think, something everybody needs, and a space to just think cleanly and clearly. And I think, honestly, it's one of the reasons I'm so excited for things like national parks and stuff to reopen, because, you know, with limited camping sites and things like that, you know, no one is going to break those boundary rules of like groups of 10 and stuff. It's going to be very easy to keep people, you know, quarantined in small groups while allowing them to go camp and hike and things like that. And I think people are going to find spaces to breathe and create and think clearly in nature. And that's kind of one of my hopes coming out of this whole COVID-19 crisis.
Well, and speaking of nature, one thing that I've really appreciated about how you're going through quarantine is, we were talking the other day about how you started gardening, as like watching masterclass on gardening and starting to do it more often. And I do think that the idea that if you don't come out of quarantine without a new skill or a new language or whatever is a fallacy. Like, I don't think that holds any true merit. I think
Yeah,
if you make it
this whole experience is a trauma. This is a trauma experience for our entire society. So if you just survive it, well done.
correct, yeah. And also, I think that there's plenty of opportunities that we can take advantage of. And so it's been cool to see you take advantage of it in the way of
Thank
gardening.
you.
And
These
it
are
makes
plants.
a pretty good background for the video too.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, these are my Pacific Northwest rhododendron. I'm very proud of them. This is my favorite. It's got like a cool curvy trunk, which I love. I was gonna just jump into book 2 real quick.
Yeah.
So Stephen is he's on a date with someone, and the book opens with "What's her angle," which is one of his psychiatrist character basically saying, like, who is this person we're on a date with, and what is she trying to get from us? Which, as we're coming out of quarantine, something that I feel like we might see is an increase in our own paranoia. Of like, we haven't been out in months. We haven't had parties and groups, and people are discovering whether they are an introvert or an extrovert, to use those words, because they've been locked up, and they're like, I'm doing okay. It's been 2 months, and like, I would like to see my friends, but I'm still okay. And there are people who went crazy on day 2.
Right.
So, I think we're going to see an increase in this paranoia, and gardening for me was something I could do to kind of, it's almost meditative. I take a break from what I'm doing. I mix the compost, and I check the plants, and I trim the leaves, and I live in an apartment, and so I have I think I have 20 something potted plants or so, just trying to keep things green.
Yeah.
And that helps me get out of that circular state of what's this person's angle? They want to talk to me, they're not wearing a mask, like that kind of whole suspicious thing, which, and even increased to that is the suspicion of other countries and other people groups, as we start to play the blame game with this virus.
Yeah.
So and Trevor, I know you've been diving really hard into your editing, and you're going to have a kid, so you've been preparing for that.
Yep.
You've been just working super hard doing all of this video work. Do you feel the strain while you're doing the video work, or does that kind of help you get into kind of a meditative, out of the panic state?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually, I can't remember. I think Nerdpocalypse came out real early in our process of quarantine. And there were a couple other projects that were happening. And what I found was I had gone 5 days of editing for, 10 hours a day, creating videos, all that stuff. I actually think, no, I was going to say that the Fellowship of the Emotions came out or was produced at that time, but I don't think it was. But I remember looking up and realizing that I had spent so much time doing video work and editing and just being busy, and realized that it was all just trying to cope with this anxiety that I was feeling, trying to escape from it, focusing on something different. And my wife actually called me out on it. And so I had to spend some time really concentrating on, okay, I'm trying to avoid this feeling by staying busy. And I know that a lot of us are doing that. Wow. And I think that we, to tie it back into the kind of thing that we're talking about, sort of the trunk of this conversation, I think Stephen Leeds does that a lot too, where he has this natural anxiety that he's feeling, and he distracts himself either by focusing on the aspects or taking jobs. And it's just a human thing that we do. If things are hard, we want to avoid it because it's hard and hurt and can hurt. And so in the past, I've been really, past few weeks, I've been really conscious of how much am I doing this out of stress and how much am I doing this out of necessity. And as I've found a better balance between those two things, I've actually, like, when people ask, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm living my best life. Like, this is wonderful. Everything, I have no complaints about the past 2 months. Apart from I'm trying to maybe grow my hair out, taking advantage of that opportunity. I don't know if I'll make it. It's probably going to get cut off at the first opportunity.
Man, I appreciate that your wife was able to call you out on that, and you started dealing with it, and it actually got you to a better place. And so, I mean, I'm glad that you've been able to use this time well and be honest with yourself about those feelings. And I hope those of you that are watching are able to be honest with yourselves about this whole experience and what it's doing to you.
Yeah.
You know, I had a friend post, you know, he's a gym rat, and he's just always at the gym. He goes like twice a day. And he posted on Facebook. He was like, you know, check in on your gym rat friends. We are not okay. And like, I was thinking, like, you know, who else, what other type of person has a less obvious coping mechanism that they can't get to? And are we checking on each other and checking on ourselves? Like, for me, I didn't realize for the first few weeks, I was getting frustrated that as my work hours were getting cut down, because I listened to audiobooks at work. And I hadn't been listening to as many books because I hadn't been out of the house as much. And so, you know, I just wanted to read and relax and do something other than not that I mind being with my family, but there's something about having space to just be in quiet. And I have a 2-year-old, 9-month-old. So that is something that I have to fight for. And I think one thing I want to step into here with Stephen Leeds is, as he goes through the different books, you can see him, as you said, Trevor, always distracting himself. He's never alone, even though he can think so he's alone. Like, his aspects don't automatically follow him. He can ask them basically to give him space, but he never does that. He's always just himself with facts from Abraham or paranoia from JC, or from his own mental instability. And so he's not focusing on who he is, he's focusing on his issue. And I think whenever it comes up in conversation, he always dodges the question. He says like, oh, you know, you call me insane, but I'm not. No, I'm not crazy, because, you know, the guy who lives a totally normal life and is healthy and happy, and then, you know, beats his dog, you know, we don't call him crazy, even though what he's doing is erratic. What I'm doing, while abnormal, isn't crazy. I'm not hurting anybody.
And I think, so to jump on that, Peter, there's something very interesting about Stephen Leeds, where his two most familiar, always there aspects are a psychologist and an ex-military or current military, wherever you are in the books. Ex-Navy SEAL or Space Ranger, one of the two. And so the interesting thing to me is as a counselor, I would receive that as the aspects Stephen Leeds chooses to keep near him are the one that is self-reflective, that is telling him about what he's feeling, what he's experiencing, the way that people are interpreting him, the way that he's interpreting other people, as well as somebody who makes him feel safe and secure. And I think that those two things are so common in our own lives that we hopefully have a fair amount of value placed on self-reflection and growing and learning more about ourselves, but it has to come with that sense of safety and security as well. And so even though Stephen Leeds is saying that he's not crazy, he still recognizes the need for somebody to reflect back to him what he's feeling and hearing. And that's something that I think we can get from really good friends. We can get it from journaling. We can get it obviously through counseling. And with all of those things too, recognizing that that's sometimes very scary, sometimes very feels dangerous and risky. And so we need somebody.
Doesn't work unless you're vulnerable.
Yeah, and totally.
Vulnerability is defined by that feeling of, I'm not safe because I'm putting myself out there. But continue.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I think, when we do feel that vulnerability, we just need to have somebody or people around us or ways to make ourselves feel like we are safe, the way that JD makes Stephen Leeds feel safe.
Yeah, I agree. And there's the third person. So he's got those two aspects, Ivy and JC, and then he also always has Tobias, who is the Morgan Freeman like historian character, and his job is to comfort, calm, and distract Stephen Leeds, and he kind of plays the role of um, almost, he's almost that the best friend who, you call up and you're like, hey man, I'm just kind of freaking out right now.
Mm-hmm.
And your friend is like, dude, I get that. You want to come over and just play video games for a while? And then 2 hours pass, you played some video games and you're like, okay, I feel a little better. Things have calmed down. So along with self-reflection provided by Ivy and the safety provided by JC, there's also this distraction and growth that we get through Tobias.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
as Tobias, every time Tobias starts talking, he'll start rambling about something. You'll notice here that this building that we're in is a late, 1950s, and he talks about the architecture or the history or the plans. He just knows things.
Yeah.
And Stephen always closes his eyes and just listens to the soothing voice for, just a little bit, and he's relaxed, and then he dives back into whatever he's doing. And so, I encourage, that's what we're doing here on this video. Is we want to encourage you to take time to distract yourself for a minute, let yourself rest and relax, do something to make yourself feel safe, and do something to self-reflect on everything that you just did above, and put yourself into a state where when you come out of this, you're not just flinging your paranoid self out into the world. You're coming into it from a place of health.
I love that. I love that. And one of the best ways that you can distract yourself right now, if you're watching this video, you're probably a I wanted to say Sandersite, but that doesn't sound right.
Well, I think it's you're a Sandersonian.
Sandersonian? You're probably a Sandersonian. And Peter just recently released a video on the top 10 reasons that the Cosmere needs to be animated. Would highly recommend that you go check that out, as well as all the other contributors on OGrids that we have intentionally and somewhat unintentionally taken it a little bit easier during this quarantine as we figure out the new routine. I'm sure that as the world returns to something a little bit different, we will come back a little bit more on a routine. Until then, we're so glad that you're here, and we hope that you're doing well. Feel free to reach out to us in the comments. We'd love to engage with you there.
Yeah. You guys, we love you, and stay healthy.